I kicked the bedroom door open, the force of it slamming against the wall with a bang that echoed through the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in the scene before me. There was Rachel, my wife of 10 years, tangled in the sheets with Michael, my best friend. Their shocked faces froze as they registered my presence, but not before I saw the panic in their eyes. The image seared into my brain, a sight I knew I'd never be able to erase. For a moment, the room was deathly silent. The kind of silence that comes right before a storm. Rachel stammered something, but I didn't catch the words. All I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears, the sound of my world collapsing. I wanted to scream, to tear the room apart, but instead, I turned and walked out, leaving them in stunned silence. My footsteps were heavy as I descended the stairs, each step more deliberate than the last. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing in the middle of the driveway, staring blankly at the street. My hands were shaking, my breath ragged, but my mind was clear, sharper than it had ever been. The betrayal cut deep, but as I stood there, something inside me shifted. The anger and hurt turned into something cold and calculating. I knew I couldn't let them get away with this. They had to pay. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. Rachel was wary, her eyes searching mine for any sign of the fury that had flashed through me the night before. But I was calm, unnervingly so. And that seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. I told her I needed some time to process everything, and that I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. She seemed relieved, perhaps thinking that I might forgive her in time. Little did she know, forgiveness was the last thing on my mind. I started laying the groundwork for my revenge, all while pretending to reconcile. I told Rachel I wanted to work through our issues, and that I believed in our marriage, but inside, I was already plotting my next move. I needed to know exactly how deep their betrayal went, so I installed hidden cameras throughout the house. I wanted proof, undeniable evidence that would not only ruin them but leave them with nothing. In the meantime, I arranged a meeting with my lawyer. I made it clear that I wanted a divorce, and I wanted it on my terms. Rachel wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed, not after what she had done. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Lisa, assured me that we could build a case strong enough to strip Rachel of everything, our house, our savings, even custody of our children if it came to that. That evening, I invited Michael out for drinks. He was hesitant at first, but I insisted, playing the part of the devastated husband seeking comfort from his closest friend. As we sat at the bar, I kept my emotions in check, asking him about his life, his work, and his plans. He had no idea that every word he spoke was driving a nail deeper into his own coffin. By the time I got home that night, Rachel was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I stood over her for a moment, watching her breathe, and felt nothing but contempt. She didn't stir as I turned and left the room, heading to my study where I spent the rest of the night reviewing the footage from the hidden cameras. It wasn't long before I had exactly what I needed, concrete evidence of their affair. The pieces were falling into place. They thought they had won, that they had fooled me, but they had no idea what was coming. The storm was brewing, and when it hit, it would leave nothing but devastation in its wake. The days that followed were filled with a deceptive calm. Rachel seemed to believe that my silence meant I was coming to terms with what had happened, that I might even be considering forgiveness. Michael, on the other hand, was careful around me, perhaps sensing that something wasn't quite right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. I continued to play my part, smiling when needed, and engaging in small talk, all the while planning their downfall. I began inviting Michael over more frequently, making sure Rachel was aware each time. I needed them to believe that I was oblivious, that their secret was safe. I even suggested we have a small get-together at our house, just the three of us, like old times. They hesitated at first, but I insisted, telling them that I wanted to rebuild our friendship and that I didn't want to lose either of them over one mistake. It was a lie, of course, but a convincing one. The night of the gathering, I made sure everything was perfect. I cooked dinner, poured drinks, and acted the part of the gracious host. Rachel and Michael were visibly uncomfortable at first, but as the night wore on, they relaxed, lulled into a false sense of security. They thought the worst was over, that they had dodged a bullet. After dinner, I suggested we play a game, something to lighten the mood. We settled on a card game, and as we played, I watched them closely, noting every nervous glance and every forced laugh. I waited until they were completely at ease before I struck. "You know," I said casually, placing my cards on the table, "I've been thinking a lot about trust lately." Rachel and Michael both looked up, confusion flickering in their eyes. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze fixed on Michael. "It's funny," I continued, "how easily trust can be broken. How the people you think you know best can turn out to be complete strangers." Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. Michael shifted in his seat, his discomfort palpable. "What are you getting at, Josh?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "I'm just saying, it's important to know who you can really trust. Don't you think?" Before they could respond, I stood up and walked over to the entertainment center. I could feel their eyes on me as I pulled out the USB drive and plugged it into the TV. The screen flickered to life, and a video began to play, footage from one of the hidden cameras. The image was crystal clear, showing Rachel and Michael together. Their betrayal on full display. Rachel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Michael's face went white as he realized what he was seeing. I turned to face them, my expression cold. "I've known for weeks," I said quietly. "I've watched every moment, listened to every word. And now, so will everyone else." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no pity. Michael tried to stammer out an apology, but I cut him off with a wave of my hand. "Save it," I snapped. "I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses. You made your choices, and now you'll face the consequences." With that, I left the room, leaving them to their misery. The trap was set, and there was no escaping it now. The next morning, I was up early, my mind already racing with the next steps. Rachel had cried herself to sleep, and Michael had left in a daze, but I had no intention of letting them recover from the shock. I had a meeting with Lisa, my lawyer, scheduled for that afternoon, and I was ready to set the legal wheels in motion. When I arrived at her office, Lisa was already prepared. I handed her the USB drive, and she reviewed the footage with a grim expression. "This is more than enough," she said, closing the laptop with a snap. "We'll file for divorce immediately, and with this evidence, Rachel doesn't stand a chance. You'll get the house, the assets, everything." "Good," I replied, my voice hard. "I want her out of my life, and I want her to feel the weight of what she's done." We discussed the strategy in detail, making sure that every possible angle was covered. By the time I left her office, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The legal process would take time, but it was just another piece of the puzzle, another step in my carefully laid plan. When I got home, Rachel was sitting in the living room, her eyes red from crying. She looked up at me with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Josh, please," she began, her voice trembling. "Can we talk about this? Can't we try to fix things?" I stared at her. My heart as cold as ice. "There's nothing to fix, Rachel. You destroyed everything the moment you decided to sleep with Michael." She flinched as if I had struck her, but I didn't care. I had no sympathy left to give. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I continued, watching as her face crumpled. "The divorce papers will be ready soon, and you'll be served within the week. You can take what little you have left and get out." Rachel's tears flowed freely now, but I turned away, leaving her to drown in her guilt. I had more important things to do. That evening, I sent the footage to everyone who mattered, our friends, our families, Michael's coworkers. I wanted the world to see them for what they were. There would be no hiding from this, no sweeping it under the rug. They would be exposed, and their reputations shattered. The responses were immediate. Calls and messages flooded in, some offering sympathy, others expressing shock and outrage. Michael's life, once so neatly ordered, began to unravel at the seams. He lost his job within days, and the company was unable to ignore the scandal. His friends turned their backs on him, and he became a pariah in our social circle. As for Rachel, she was left with nothing. She moved out of the house with only a few belongings, forced to start over from scratch. Her family, deeply religious and unforgiving, disowned her, leaving her truly alone. I watched it all unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction. They had betrayed me, and now they were paying the price. But even as I reveled in my victory, a part of me felt hollow. The revenge I had so carefully orchestrated had come at a cost, a part of myself that I could never get back. The days following Rachel's departure were eerily quiet. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with emptiness. I had what I wanted, my revenge was complete, and the people who had betrayed me were destroyed. But as the silence settled in, I began to feel the weight of it all. The satisfaction I'd expected, the sense of closure, was absent. Instead, there was a gnawing emptiness that I couldn't shake. I spent my days going through the motions, filling the time with meaningless tasks. I worked late into the night, avoiding the hollow spaces in the house where memories of our life together still lingered. Rachel had tried to call me several times, leaving tearful voicemails that I deleted without listening to. Michael, too, had attempted to reach out, but I blocked his number. I wanted nothing to do with either of them. Yet their absence was a constant reminder of the life that had been shattered. One afternoon, I decided to visit our old hangout spot, a small bar on the edge of town where Michael and I used to unwind after work. I walked in, hoping to find some solace in the familiar surroundings, but instead, I was met with cold stares and whispered conversations. Word of the affair and my revenge had spread quickly, and it seemed that everyone had taken sides, most of them against me. "Hey, Josh," the bartender, Jake, said as I took a seat. His voice was laced with pity, and I hated it. "Haven't seen you around in a while. How've you been holding up?" "I'm fine," I replied curtly, ordering a drink. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. The revenge that had once fueled me was beginning to eat away at my soul. I had destroyed not just their lives, but my own as well. As I sipped my drink, I overheard snippets of conversation from the other patrons. They talked about how Michael had lost everything, and how Rachel was struggling to find her footing. But what stung me the most was hearing how they pitied them, how some even blamed me for being too harsh, for not trying to work things out. It was then that I realized the full extent of what I'd done. In my quest for revenge, I had alienated myself from everyone. I was now as much of an outcast as they were, and the victory I had sought felt hollow. I left the bar without finishing my drink, the cold night air biting at my skin as I walked aimlessly through the streets. The city that had once felt like home now felt foreign, and I found myself longing for something I couldn't define. For the first time since discovering the affair, I wondered if I had made the right choices, if perhaps there had been another way, a way that didn't leave me so utterly alone. A few weeks passed, each day blending into the next. I continued to push forward, throwing myself into work, but the emptiness persisted. It was as if the very act of revenge had drained me of any real emotion, leaving behind only a shell of the person I used to be. One evening, as I was leaving the office late, I decided to take a different route home, hoping that a change of scenery might clear my head. As I drove through the city, I passed by a small cafe that Rachel and I used to frequent. On impulse, I pulled over and went inside. The cafe was nearly empty, the only customers were a few couples enjoying quiet conversations. I ordered a coffee and took a seat by the window, staring out at the street as the memories of better days washed over me. I didn't notice the person approaching until they were standing right beside my table. "Josh?" a familiar voice said softly. I looked up, and there she was, Rachel. She looked different, worn down by the events of the past few months, but there was a softness in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. She hesitated, as if unsure whether to sit down or walk away. "Rachel," I said, my voice betraying a mix of surprise and unease. "What are you doing here?" I was just passing by, she replied, her gaze dropping to the floor. I saw you through the window and… I don't know, I guess I just wanted to talk. There was a long pause, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. I gestured to the chair opposite me, and she sat down, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I know what I did was wrong, and I've paid the price for it. I needed to see you, to tell you that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I stared at her, the anger and resentment that had fueled me for so long now replaced by something else, something closer to pity. Rachel looked so small, so fragile, and I could see the toll that everything had taken on her. But I also saw the person I had once loved, the woman I had built a life with, and it stirred something deep inside me. I don't know if I can forgive you, I admitted, my voice tight. What you did, it broke me, Rachel. It broke us. I know, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. And I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. But I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you, not like this. There was a long silence as we both struggled with our emotions. I could feel the anger still simmering beneath the surface, but it was different now, less consuming, less all-encompassing. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the faint stirrings of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel, closure. I don't know what happens next, I finally said, meeting her gaze. But I think we both need to move on, to find a way to live with what's happened. Rachel nodded, wiping away her tears. I agree. I think that's the only way forward. We sat there for a while longer, talking about the mundane details of life, avoiding the painful memories that still lingered. It wasn't a reconciliation, not by any means, but it was a start, a tentative step toward healing. As I left the cafe that night, I felt lighter. As if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the darkness. Days turned into weeks, and the initial shock of my encounter with Rachel at the cafe began to fade. The brief conversation we'd had lingered in my mind, though, and I found myself replaying it over and over. Something in her eyes had struck a chord, an understanding of the pain she'd caused. But also a reflection of my own suffering. I'd achieved the revenge I'd sought, but at what cost? The fallout from the affair had left scars on all of us. Michael had lost his job and was barely scraping by, while Rachel had become a ghost of her former self, withdrawn and isolated. As for me, I had become a man consumed by bitterness, defined by the betrayal that had upended my life. One evening, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. Josh, it's Michael, came the voice on the other end. I froze, the sound of his voice sending a wave of anger through me. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you. What do you want, Michael? I replied coldly, my grip tightening on the phone. I need to see you, face to face. Please, Josh. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to explain. Can we meet? Every instinct told me to hang up, to ignore his plea, but something made me agree. Maybe it was the lingering sense of unfinished business, or maybe it was the part of me that was still searching for answers, for closure. We arranged to meet at a park near my house, a neutral space where we could talk without the weight of our past pressing down on us. When I arrived, Michael was already there, sitting on a bench with his head in his hands. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Thanks for coming, he said finally, his voice strained. I wasn't sure if you would. I'm here, I replied tersely. Say what you need to say. He nodded, taking a deep breath before he began. I've spent the last few months trying to figure out how everything went so wrong. I know what I did was unforgivable, and I know I hurt you more than I can ever make right. But I need you to understand. I never meant for it to happen. I listened in silence as he talked, explaining how the affair had started, how it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that had spiraled out of control. He spoke of his own guilt, his shame, and how the weight of what he'd done had destroyed him from the inside out. "I've lost everything, Josh," he continued, his voice breaking. "My job, my friends, my self-respect. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I needed to face you, to admit what I've done, and to let you know that I'm truly sorry." For the first time, I saw the man behind the betrayal, the friend I had once trusted, now broken and hollowed out by his own actions. The anger that had fueled me for so long began to waver, replaced by a profound sadness. We had both lost so much, and there was no going back to the way things were. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. "But I appreciate that you've come here to say this." I needed to hear it. Michael nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I understand. I just hope that one day, we can both move on from this." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our shared past heavy between us. There was no dramatic resolution, no grand gesture of reconciliation, just two men facing the consequences of their actions, trying to find a way forward in a world that had changed beyond recognition. When I left the park that night, I felt a strange sense of relief. The meeting with Michael hadn't erased the pain, but it had given me something I hadn't expected, the realization that clinging to my anger was only prolonging my own suffering. It was time to start letting go, piece by piece. As summer turned to autumn, I began to take small steps toward rebuilding my life. The house that had once felt like a prison slowly became a place of solace again, though it was still haunted by memories of what had been. I spent more time outside, taking long walks through the neighborhood, enjoying the crisp air and the vibrant colors of the changing leaves. It was a time of reflection, a period where I could begin to process everything that had happened. One afternoon, while I was out walking, I passed by a community center where a sign caught my eye: volunteers needed for after-school programs. I had always enjoyed working with kids, and the idea of doing something positive, something that wasn't centered around my own pain, was appealing. On a whim, I decided to stop in and see if they could use an extra pair of hands. The director, a kind woman named Claire, welcomed me warmly. She was enthusiastic about my offer to help, and before I knew it, I was volunteering several times a week, assisting with homework, organizing activities, and getting to know the kids. It was a small thing, but it made a difference, not just for them, but for me as well. It gave me a sense of purpose, something to focus on outside of my own turmoil. The more time I spent at the community center, the more I began to feel like myself again. The kids' laughter and energy were contagious, and I found myself smiling more, feeling lighter with each passing day. I wasn't healed, not completely, but I was beginning to find my way back to a place of peace. One evening, as I was packing up to leave the center, Claire approached me. "Josh, I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've been doing here," she said, her voice warm. "The kids really appreciate it, and so do I." "It's nothing, really," I replied, a bit embarrassed by the praise. "I'm just glad I can help." "It's more than just helping," she insisted, her eyes meeting mine. "You're making a real difference here. I can see it in the way the kids respond to you, and the way they look up to you. It's clear that you care." Her words touched something deep within me, and I felt a rush of gratitude, for her kindness, for the opportunity to do something good, and for the chance to start over. It wasn't a grand epiphany or a sudden transformation, but it was a moment of clarity, a realization that I was on the right path. Over the next few weeks, I continued to volunteer, and the sense of fulfillment grew. The more I gave, the more I received in return, a renewed sense of purpose, a connection to others, and a gradual healing of the wounds that had once seemed insurmountable. One afternoon, as I was leaving the center, I ran into Rachel. She was standing by the entrance, holding a bag of groceries. We hadn't spoken since that night at the cafe, and the sight of her took me by surprise. "Josh," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I volunteer here now," I replied, unsure of what else to say. "What about you?" "I just moved into the neighborhood," she explained. "I'm trying to get involved in the community, start fresh." There was an awkward silence as we both searched for the right words. Finally, Rachel spoke again, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "I know we've both been through a lot, and I don't expect anything from you. But I want you to know that I'm working on myself, trying to be better, to make up for the mistakes I've made." I nodded, appreciating her honesty. "I'm doing the same." "It's not easy, but I think it's worth it." She smiled a small, tentative smile that hinted at the possibility of something new, a future that, while uncertain, was not without hope. As I watched her walk away, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't known I needed. The past was behind us, and while it would always be a part of who we were, it no longer defined us. We were both moving forward, step by step, toward a future that was ours to shape. And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. Not by holding on to the past, but by embracing the possibilities of what lay ahead. The weeks turned into months, and life began to find a new rhythm. My work at the community center had become more than just a distraction. It had become a central part of my life. The kids I worked with were a constant source of joy and inspiration, and I found myself looking forward to each day with a renewed sense of purpose. One day, as I was wrapping up an art project with the kids, Claire approached me with a smile. "Josh, I wanted to talk to you about something," she said, her tone warm but serious. "Sure, what's up?" I replied, wiping paint from my hands. "There's a special event coming up, a charity auction to raise funds for the center. We've been working on it for months, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in helping out. Your involvement would mean a lot." I hesitated for a moment. The idea of putting myself out there, of interacting with people outside the safe confines of the community center, was a bit daunting. But the thought of contributing to something meaningful outweighed my reservations. "I'd be happy to help," I said, nodding. "Just let me know what you need." Claire's smile widened. "Thank you, Josh. I knew I could count on you." In the days leading up to the auction, I found myself more involved than I had expected. Claire and I worked closely together, organizing donations, setting up the venue, and coordinating with volunteers. It was a lot of work, but it was fulfilling, and I began to feel a deeper connection not just to the center, but to Claire as well. The night of the auction arrived, and the community center was transformed into a lively, bustling space filled with people eager to support the cause. As the evening unfolded, I was struck by the sense of camaraderie and shared purpose that filled the room. It was a stark contrast to the isolation and bitterness that had once consumed me. At one point, as I was helping with the auctioneer's announcements, I caught sight of Rachel standing near the entrance. She was dressed elegantly, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the noise and chaos of the event faded into the background. Rachel made her way over to me, a small, tentative smile on her face. "Josh, this is incredible," she said, gesturing to the bustling auction. "You've done such an amazing job." "Thank you," I replied, a mixture of pride and humility in my voice. But it was a team effort. Claire and the others did most of the heavy lifting. She nodded, her smile growing more genuine. "Still, it's clear that you're making a difference here. I'm really happy for you." For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of our shared past hanging between us. But it was different now, lighter, less oppressive. The anger and resentment that had once defined our interactions were gone, replaced by something gentler, more understanding. As the evening continued, I found myself drawn into conversations with various guests, many of whom were eager to hear about the work we were doing at the center. It was during one of these conversations that I noticed Claire watching me from across the room. There was a warmth in her gaze, a look of admiration and something more, something that made my heart skip a beat. When the auction finally came to a close and the last of the guests had departed, I found myself alone with Claire, the two of us surveying the now empty hall. "We did it," Claire said, a tired but satisfied smile on her face. "Yeah, we did," I replied, feeling a sense of accomplishment wash over me. As we stood there in the quiet of the empty hall, I felt a shift in the air between us, an unspoken connection that had been growing over the past few months. Claire hesitated for a moment before speaking again, her voice softer, more personal. "Josh, I just wanted to say, I've seen the changes in you since you started here, and it's been incredible to watch. You're not just helping the kids, you've brought something special to this place. And I think you've brought something special to me, too." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. But as I looked into her eyes, I realized that I felt the same way. The connection we'd built, the bond that had formed between us, was something real, something I hadn't expected but deeply valued. "Claire, I feel the same way," I finally said, my voice steady and sincere. "You've been a big part of my healing, of finding my way back to who I used to be. I don't know where this is going, but I know I want to find out, together." She smiled, a look of relief and happiness washing over her face. "I'd like that, Josh. I'd like that a lot." As we left the community center that night, walking side by side into the crisp autumn air, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in a long time. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, I was looking forward to it, with Claire by my side. As the days passed, my relationship with Claire deepened, becoming something solid and comforting in the midst of my ongoing recovery. We spent more time together, both at the community center and outside of it, enjoying quiet dinners, long walks, and conversations that flowed effortlessly. It was a stark contrast to the turbulence of my past, and I found myself relaxing into this new chapter of my life. But even as I embraced the present, the past still lingered. Rachel and I continued to cross paths occasionally, both at the community center and in the neighborhood. Each encounter was a reminder of the life we had shared, the love that had once been so strong, and the pain that had torn us apart. One afternoon, I received a message from Rachel asking if we could meet. She didn't say why, but something in her tone made me agree. We met at a small park not far from where we used to live, the same park where I had confronted Michael months earlier. When I arrived, Rachel was already there, sitting on a bench and staring out at the pond. She looked up as I approached, her expression unreadable. "Thanks for meeting me," she said quietly, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. "Of course," I replied, sitting down beside her. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about everything that's happened, about where we are now. And I realized I never really let go of the hope that we could somehow fix things, that maybe we could find a way back to each other." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the lingering affection that she still felt for me. But as I listened, I realized that I didn't feel the same. The love we had shared was real, and it would always be a part of me. But it was no longer what defined me. I had moved on, not just from the betrayal, but from the life we had once had together. "Rachel," I began carefully, "I understand why you feel that way. And there was a time when I thought the same thing, when I wanted nothing more than to turn back the clock and fix what went wrong. But we can't go back. Too much has happened, and we've both changed." She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. I needed to hear it from you. I needed to know for sure." There was a long silence as we both processed the finality of what had been said. It was a moment of closure, a quiet acknowledgement that our chapter together had come to an end. "I'll always care about you, Rachel," I continued, my voice soft but firm. "And I hope you find happiness, the kind of happiness you deserve. But it's time for us both to let go." She wiped away a tear, her expression a mixture of sadness and acceptance. "You're right. It's time." We sat there for a while longer, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting the park in a golden glow. It was a peaceful moment, a fitting end to the turmoil that had once consumed us. When we finally parted ways, there were no promises of keeping in touch, no lingering looks or regrets. Just a quiet understanding that we had both made peace with the past and were ready to move forward. As I walked away from the park, I felt a lightness in my step, a sense of freedom that had been missing for so long. The weight of the past had finally been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Life, I realized, was about more than just surviving the storms. It was about finding the strength to rebuild, to create something new from the ashes of what had been. As I looked ahead to the future, with Claire by my side and the lessons of the past behind me, I knew that I was ready to embrace whatever came next. As winter settled in, life continued to move forward. The snow fell softly outside, blanketing the neighborhood in a serene, quiet beauty that I had begun to appreciate. My relationship with Claire grew deeper, and we found ourselves spending more time together, both at the community center and in each other's homes. The warmth and comfort of her presence were exactly what I needed after everything that had happened. One evening, after we had finished dinner at her place, Claire and I were sitting on the couch, enjoying the quiet moments that had become so familiar. The fire crackled in the background, and the soft glow of the flames illuminated the room. "I've been thinking," Claire said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About us, about where we're heading." I looked at her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, then continued. "I care about you, Josh. A lot. And I can see us having a future together. But I also know that trust is something that has to be rebuilt, especially after what you've been through. I don't want to rush anything or make you feel like you have to commit before you're ready." Her words were filled with understanding and compassion, and I could feel the sincerity behind them. Trust had been shattered for me in the most painful way, and it had taken time to start rebuilding it. But with Claire, I felt safe. I felt like I could let my guard down, little by little. "Claire," I said, taking her hand in mine, "I appreciate how patient and understanding you've been. You're right, trust is something that has to be earned, and it's not something I take lightly anymore. But with you, I feel like I'm ready to start building that trust again." She smiled, her eyes softening with emotion. "I'm glad to hear that, Josh. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. We can take things as slow as you need." Her reassurance filled me with a sense of calm, and I leaned in to kiss her, grateful for the connection we had forged. It wasn't just about finding someone new, it was about finding someone who understood me, respected the scars I carried, and was willing to walk beside me as I healed. As the night went on, we talked about our hopes and dreams for the future, about what we wanted from life and from each other. It was a conversation filled with honesty and vulnerability, and it brought us even closer together. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking more about the future, about what it would mean to truly move on, to let go of the past and embrace what lay ahead. The idea of building something new with Claire excited me. But it also scared me. Trusting someone again was a leap of faith, one that I wasn't sure I was entirely ready for. But every time I looked into Claire's eyes, every time she smiled at me or reached out to hold my hand, I felt a little more secure, a little more willing to take that leap. And I knew that as long as we continued to communicate openly and honestly, we would be able to navigate whatever challenges came our way. Just as life seemed to be settling into a new normal, an unexpected event threw everything into turmoil once again. One afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Josh, it's Michael." My heart skipped a beat at the sound of his voice. It had been months since we last spoke, and I had hoped that our conversation in the park had been the final chapter in our story. "What do you want, Michael?" I asked, my tone guarded. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice tense. "It's about Rachel." The mention of her name sent a chill down my spine. What about her? I didn't want to get involved, but she's been in a bad place lately. I'm worried about her, Josh. She's been drinking a lot and making some questionable decisions. I think she's spiraling, and I don't know what to do. His words took me by surprise. Rachel had always been strong and independent, and seeing her unravel like this was something I hadn't anticipated. I'm not sure what you expect me to do, I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. We're not together anymore. It's not my place to step in. I know that, Michael said quickly. But I thought you should know, in case she reaches out to you. I think she still cares about you, and I'm afraid she might do something drastic. The concern in his voice was genuine, and it unsettled me. I had tried to distance myself from Rachel, to let her go and move on with my life, but hearing that she was struggling made it difficult to ignore. I'll keep it in mind, I finally said, not sure what else to say. Thanks, Josh. I'm sorry to bring this up, but I didn't know who else to turn to. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. The news about Rachel weighed heavily on me, stirring up feelings I had thought were buried. Despite everything that had happened between us, I didn't want to see her destroy herself. That evening, I couldn't shake the conversation from my mind. Claire noticed my distraction and gently probed, asking if everything was okay. I debated whether or not to tell her, unsure of how she would react. Finally, I decided to be honest. I got a call from Michael today, I said, my voice tense. He said Rachel's been having a hard time, that she's been drinking a lot and making bad decisions. Claire's expression softened with concern. I'm sorry to hear that, Josh. I know it must be hard for you to hear. It is, I admitted, running a hand through my hair. I thought I was past all of this. But hearing that she's struggling, it brings everything back. Claire reached out and took my hand, her touch grounding me. It's okay to feel that way. You cared about her once, and it's natural to still have some feelings for her, even if it's just concern. I don't know what to do, I confessed. I don't want to get pulled back into the past, but I also don't want to ignore what's happening. You don't have to make any decisions right now, Claire said gently. Just take it one step at a time. And remember, I'm here for you, whatever you decide. Her support meant the world to me, and I leaned on it as I tried to sort through my conflicting emotions. The past had a way of resurfacing when you least expected it, and as much as I wanted to move on, it seemed that Rachel's troubles were something I couldn't easily ignore. As I lay in bed that night, Claire's words echoed in my mind, it's okay to feel that way. I wasn't sure what the next step would be, but I knew I didn't have to face it alone. For the first time, I felt that I could navigate this new challenge, no matter how complicated it might be. And as I drifted off to sleep, I held on to the knowledge that with Claire by my side, I could face whatever came next, whether it was confronting the ghosts of the past or embracing the possibilities of the future. Days passed after Michael's call, and Rachel remained on my mind. I tried to focus on my life with Claire and the progress we were making, but thoughts of Rachel's struggles lingered, unsettling the peace I had worked so hard to achieve. Claire noticed my distraction, but she didn't press me. Her patience and understanding only made me feel more guilty for being unable to let go of the past completely. One afternoon, after much deliberation, I decided to reach out to Rachel. I didn't know what I would say or how she would react, but ignoring the situation felt wrong. I needed to confront the lingering shadows of my past so that I could finally move forward without any regrets. I called Rachel, and after a few rings, she answered. Her voice was different, softer, less confident than I remembered. Josh? I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Hey, Rachel, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. I heard you've been going through a tough time lately. I wanted to check in and see how you're doing. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost feel her hesitation. I'm fine, she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. I've been dealing with a lot. I know it's not my place anymore, but if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here, I offered, hoping she would open up. Rachel let out a small, bitter laugh. It's funny, isn't it? After everything, you're still the one I want to talk to. But I don't know if I deserve that. Rachel, we've both made mistakes, I said gently. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve help or support. We had something real once, and I don't want to see you hurt yourself. Her voice wavered as she replied. I miss what we had, Josh. I know I messed up, and I've regretted it every day since. But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to fix myself. Hearing the pain in her voice stirred emotions I thought I had buried. It wasn't love, not the way it used to be, but a deep sense of sadness for what had been lost and for the person she had become. You don't have to do this alone, Rachel. You can get help. It's not too late to turn things around. There was a long silence before she spoke again. Her voice barely above a whisper. Do you really believe that? Yes, I do, I said firmly. But it starts with you making the choice to move forward, to let go of the guilt and start healing. I don't know if I'm strong enough, she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice breaking my heart. You are, I assured her. You just need to believe it. The conversation ended on a tentative note, with Rachel promising to seek help but still sounding unsure of herself. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Reaching out to her had been the right thing to do, but it also reopened old wounds I had been trying to close. That evening, I told Claire about the conversation. She listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. When I finished, she reached out and took my hand. I'm proud of you for reaching out to her, Claire said softly. It couldn't have been easy, but it shows how much you've grown. Thank you, I replied, squeezing her hand. I just hope she takes the help. I don't want to see her self-destruct. You've done what you can, Claire said reassuringly. The rest is up to her. All you can do now is focus on your own healing and on our future. She was right, of course. I had done my part, and now it was time to let go, truly let go, and focus on the life I was building with Claire. It wasn't easy, but with her by my side, I knew I could face whatever challenges came our way. The weeks following my conversation with Rachel were a period of introspection and quiet resolution. I had confronted the last remnants of my past, and now it was time to fully embrace the future. Claire and I grew even closer during this time, our bond solidified by the understanding and support we had shown each other. One Saturday morning, as we sat together in her kitchen enjoying a leisurely breakfast, I found myself thinking about how far we had come. The journey had been painful, filled with heartbreak and betrayal, but it had led me to a place of healing and hope. Claire must have noticed the contemplative look on my face because she reached across the table and touched my hand. Penny, for your thoughts? I smiled at her, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. I was just thinking about how lucky I am. After everything that's happened, I didn't think I'd ever find happiness again. But here we are. She smiled back, her eyes shining with affection. We've both been through a lot, but I think it's made us stronger. And I'm so glad we found each other. Her words touched me deeply, and at that moment, I knew that I was ready to take the next step in our relationship. The idea had been in the back of my mind for a while, but now, it felt like the right time. Claire, I began, my heart pounding in my chest. There's something I've been thinking about for a while now. We've built something really special together, and I want to keep building on that, with you. She looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and hope. What are you saying, Josh? Taking a deep breath, I stood up and walked around the table to where she was sitting. I took her hands in mine and knelt down in front of her. My heart racing. Claire, you've been my rock through all of this. You've shown me what it means to love and trust again. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building a future that's filled with love, trust, and happiness. Will you marry me? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, she was too emotional to speak. But then she nodded, a radiant smile spreading across her face. Yes, Josh. Yes, I will. Relief and joy flooded through me as I pulled her into my arms, holding her close as we both laughed and cried with happiness. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered emotion, the culmination of everything we had been through together. As we held each other, the future stretched out before us, filled with endless possibilities. The pain of the past had finally been laid to rest, and in its place was a new beginning, a chance to build a life together that was stronger, happier, and more resilient than anything I could have imagined. At that moment, I knew that I had truly moved on. The shadows of the past no longer held any power over me. With Claire by my side, I was ready to embrace the future with open arms, confident that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The days after Claire accepted my proposal were a whirlwind of joy and anticipation. We began planning our future together, discussing everything from where we wanted to live to what kind of wedding we envisioned. It was a time filled with hope and excitement, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the past year. But even as we looked forward, there was one last thing I needed to do to truly close the chapter on my old life. The conversation with Rachel left me unsettled, and while I had done my best to move on, I knew that our story wasn't fully over until we had one final face-to-face meeting. I reached out to her again, suggesting we meet at a quiet cafe we used to frequent. It was a place filled with memories, both good and bad, and it felt like the right setting for our final conversation. When I arrived, Rachel was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She looked different, thinner, more worn, but there was a determination in her eyes that hadn't been there during our last call. As I approached, she stood up, and we exchanged an awkward hug before sitting down. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of nervousness and relief. "I'm glad you agreed," I replied, taking a seat across from her. "I think we both need this." She nodded, fiddling with the edge of her cup. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since we last talked, and I realized I needed to make some changes. I started seeing a therapist, and I'm working on getting sober." Hearing that brought a sense of relief. "I'm really glad to hear that, Rachel. It takes a lot of strength to face your demons." "It's not easy," she admitted, her eyes downcast. "But I had to do something. I couldn't keep living the way I was. I was hurting myself, and I was hurting you, too. I'm so sorry for everything, Josh. For the lies, the betrayal, all of it." There was genuine remorse in her voice, and for the first time, I felt a sense of closure. "I appreciate that, Rachel. And I want you to know that I've forgiven you. I needed to let go of the anger and resentment to move on with my life. And I have moved on." She looked up at me, a sad smile on her lips. "I can see that. You seem different. Happier." "I am," I said, and for the first time, I truly meant it. "Claire and I are getting married. She's been a huge part of my healing process, and I'm excited about our future together." Rachel's smile faltered for a moment, but then she nodded. "I'm happy for you, Josh. You deserve to be happy." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "And you deserve to find peace and happiness too, Rachel. I hope you continue to work on yourself and build the life you want." We talked for a while longer, the conversation flowing more easily as we reminisced about the good times we had shared. It was bittersweet, but it felt right, like we were finally putting the past to rest. When we parted ways, there were no hard feelings, no lingering bitterness. Just two people who had once loved each other, saying goodbye and wishing each other well on their separate journeys. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt a sense of finality. The chapter with Rachel was truly closed, and all that remained was the future I was building with Claire. It was a future filled with promise, and I was ready to embrace it fully. That evening, when I returned home to Claire, I felt lighter than I had in years. She greeted me with a warm smile, and as I took her in my arms, I knew that I had finally found what I had been searching for: peace, love, and the chance to start anew. The pain of the past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was ready to step into the next chapter of my life, hand in hand with the woman I loved, knowing that together, we could face anything the future held. And as I held Claire close, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new story, one that was ours to write, filled with love, trust, and the promise of a lifetime of happiness.